I would like to warmly welcome you to this year's Humboldt-Rede zu Europa. It's really a great pleasure to greet you as our guests in physical presence rather than remote via video. It's been a long time since our Senate Hall has been as full as today. The Humboldt speeches on Europe are among our most prominent and popular events. And it's a tradition that was founded over 20 years ago. The first keynote was given by the former German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer. 45 high-ranking speakers from all over the continent have since followed and shared with us their view on the current state of Europe. Statesmen and women, political leaders, constitutional court judges, or financial experts from Ireland to Portugal, Turkey to Estonia have come here to our university, and we are really proud of that. It has been an important forum, not only present new ideas for Europe, but also to discuss with our students as the new generation. The last 1.5 years have presented us with major challenges. Our students, but really all of us working in education, science and research, have suffered heavy setbacks. Take, for example, the Erasmus program as one of the most important schemes of integration of the European community. It simply can't work under the strict conditions of lockdown and closed universities. Another big issue we were confronted was the lack of digitalization. Fortunately, here at Humboldt University, we were able to transfer about 90% of our courses into digital formats. However, digitalization is about more than surviving a crisis with short-term solutions. At the university, meaningful digitalization efforts require a modern and safe equipment of hardware and software. It requires the technological skill set to use it. Our lecturers need a new and widened understanding about how to connect students digitally. After all, as before the pandemic, we want to fascinate and engage our students with modern and interactive modes of teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, the keynote speaker today knows what we are talking about. Margrethe Vestager is not only well known for being the European Commissioner for Competition since 2014, she has also acted as the Executive Vice President of the European Commission for Europe Fit for the Digital Age since 2019. In all her efforts, Mrs. Vestager has always emphasized the impact digitalization has beyond a mere technological dimension. It has significantly altered our social, cultural, and political life. As we enter this new digital age, we find ourselves on the brink of another crisis, the crisis of democracy. In order to navigate through this crisis, we need to develop a sustainable long-term digital strategy together. In our interconnected times, Europe and solution is key. We are very excited to take the next step in this process here at Humboldt University. Today, it's really a great pleasure to have you here, Mrs. Vestager. We are all looking forward to your ideas. And I would also like to thank our partners and sponsors for enabling us to hold this event. Thank you very much for coming, and again, welcome at our university at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. Vielen Dank.
Your Excellency, Executive Vice President Vestager, dear representatives of the Humboldt-University, Professor Kunst, Professor Rufert, dear Dr. Hasselmar, Dr. Wojan, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. While the last Humboldt speech was still taking place under strict corona restrictions, only digitally, it is really a great pleasure that today's Humboldt speech is again taking place physically, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Stiftung Mercator. The Humboldt speech has established as a great tradition within the last years to discuss the EU's most challenging issues. And as we have just heard from our still German Chancellor during her press conference in Brussels last week, the EU is facing several challenges. At Stiftung Mercator, we try to contribute to finding solutions for these pressing issues, at least in the fields we work on, which are participation and cohesion, climate action, Europe and the world, and digital society. As a private foundation, a private and independent foundation, we strive for a society that is characterized by openness to the world, solidarity, and equal opportunities. To achieve these objectives, we support and develop projects that strengthen democracy and the rule of law in Europe, drive forward climate change mitigation, and address the impact of digitization on democracy and society. This year's Humboldt speech on democratic values in a digitalized Europe fits therefore perfectly to one of our main fields of work within our new Center of Digital Society. Because digital technologies are a great chance, as we have all experienced during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. But they also pose challenges to democratic values. The use of algorithmic systems and the public political discourse on social media are perhaps the clearest example for both. The risk and the opportunities of a lively, democratic and digitized society. Our mission at Stiftung Mercator is clear to this point. We want to defend democratic rights and principles in a digitalized society. Given fundamental attacks on European principles and an emerging power of international acting tech companies, we want digital technologies to be further developed and used only in accordance with democratic rights and values. In this regard, we follow the European legislation with great interest and are pleased to see that Europe is committed to find its own way, willing to define its own vision on how to shape digitization, not only in distinction to the US and China. When it comes to legislation and the discussion, for example, of the Digital Service Act or Digital Market Act, we believe it is important that voices of civil society actors are heard. For this reason, we fund initiatives that create space for dialogue and on the effects of digitization. And while promoting this dialogue between decision makers, policy makers, and citizens in Europe, we have a particular focus on young people. We want all young Europeans, regardless of their geographic or socio-economic background, to be able to identify with the values of the European Union and to engage in democratic processes. Therefore, I'm pleased to reinforce our support for the Humboldt speech, which takes place within the project Wir sind Europa, we are Europe. The core idea of this project is to enable young people, journalists and civil society actors to discuss their ideas with European decision makers and by doing so actively shape the future of Europe. I would therefore like to thank all our project partners, Stiftung Zukunft Berlin, the Humboldt-University Berlin, and the International Journalist Program, for working together towards this goal and for organizing today's event. My special thanks, of course, goes to you, to today's speaker, Madam Vice President Margrethe Vestager. Thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts on the democratic values in a digitalized Europe. I'm very much looking forward to your speech, and I wish everyone, both here at the Humboldt-University and in the online audience, an inspiring discussion. which will be moderated later on by Professor Rupert in proven manner. But for now, I would say, Madam Vestager, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Dear students, dear President Kunst, dear Professor Rupert, dear Mr. Dana, what an honor to be here today. The Humboldt-Rede about Europe, well, it may not be as old as the university, but it's old enough to be a landmark for discussions about our future. What should the future be for this continent, for our European Union? So thank you very much once again for hosting me today. And I will take you through how I see the role of platforms in our democracies. What should be the European reaction to this in restoring democratic control and oversight and fighting for democracy with laws. And last but not least, of course, trying to say a bit about the world that we live in, because Europe is not alone. Not in our problems, not in our successes, not in our thrive. And one of the reasons why I'm particularly happy that we can be here in the Senators' Hall, in the university, with a bus of students in the hallways, is that democracy thrives in open spaces, in cafes, at the universities, in parliament, in places where people can discuss, disagree, contradict each other, and hopefully also find compromise. And few places in Europe illustrate this better than the Humboldt-University. When Wilhelm von Humboldt created the institution, of course, he had a vision for university as a place of academic excellence, where teaching and research went hand in hand. But also as an open space where people, they would be free to study what they wanted, and where different faculties and students, that they would actually come together and talk with each other from different perspectives. And this model have inspired, not just in Europe, but around the world, step by step, a number of great universities became home for vivid exchanges of topics, of viewpoints. And you still see this in universities all over this planet, the force for democracy that you find in universities. Those were places where, and those are places, where public opinion were forged. Today, at least to some degree, these places between outdoor spaces, between the walls that we're in today, that has changed to be behind screens. Screens powered by light, but not necessarily with enlightenment. And with this shift, I, and maybe I think quite a number of other people, have the unpleasant feeling that democracy is somewhat losing ground. That the open spaces of the past have dwindled into the fragmented online spaces where no one really talks with one another anymore. So what happened? And here maybe looking back a bit would be a good idea. Not to the very far past, but just to the late 1980s and the beginning of the 90s, where the internet and the World Wide Web was just a free but somewhat chaotic place. Varied sorts of information was in principle available to everyone, but really hard to find. And here I speak of personal experience. You would make a typo in the address and you would not be able to find what you were looking for. We did not have today's platforms. We would not have the organization of knowledge, of search. We would not have the platforms to organize and disseminate content. It didn't exist. When looking for a hotel, trying to book a flight, trying to sell an old bike or the books from last year's courses, well, there were no online marketplaces that would select and present us with the most obvious options. For instance, the student of the younger generation. But this changed. It really fundamentally changed with the emergence of the large platforms of the 1970s. Few strong players emerged, and they started organizing the internet. Soon, that organization would be the organization of knowledge for millions and millions and millions of people, and that be around the world. For the first time, platforms, they acted as global matchmakers between anybody selling and offering products, services, content, information, and someone looking for it. And in the span of a few years, well, customers had access to a large range of relevant, quick, and easy-to-find options. With this ever-growing matchmaking between two sides of a market, the buyer or the seller, the one who gives and the one who takes, well, with that came market power, and with market power came control. And thanks to the data that they collect, platforms are able to decide which products or which piece of information is offered to whom, where, and when. No matter what they sell, it's the same operational logic. They create a cluster of people that will react in a similar way, whether it's buying a product or clicking on an ad. And this is in particular important for social media platforms. For them, especially clicks matter. The more content is seen or shared, well, the higher the income from advertising. And because of that, it's not so much the truthfulness or the quality of the content that matters. It is virality. Is it out there? Does it catch attention? And from there, I think it's easy to imagine how the barriers protecting our democracy could easily tumble. The point is that the economics of platforms, they sort of forces us slowly but surely into our own little space, our own private messaging group, our own social media feeds, our own fact-checking, if any, our own reality. And if you have your own reality, then democracy is basically privatized, because it's not up for discussion and contradiction anymore what is presented to you. Well, when we ignore the rest of the world, when we ignore that this is not the world we choose for ourselves, it's a small parcel of reality carefully carved out for each and every one of us. It's not the world, it's just what the sophisticated algorithm has chosen to present to us. Put to an extreme, this process was, I think, most obviously exposed or revealed by the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. Here, data from millions of users, they were stolen from their Facebook feeds and used to target messages and influence during the votes of the 2016 US presidential election. In a nutshell, what we see is more and more the risk to turn away from the plurality of opinions. Why bother if you can be with someone who agrees with you, and there's a throw-in of a few cats and puppies if you're bored. The thing is, I think we need the contradiction. We need the diversity of arguments for ourselves to be kept alive, for our curiosity to be kept alive, for our democracy to be kept alive. The risk is that convenience kills that curiosity that makes you ask for someone else's opinion, even if you have the suspicion that it's another one than you hold yourself. And when someone is offering a genuine opinion, very often what you see, sometimes in the first, but then at least in the second comment, is not contradiction. It's just hate, bigotry. The opposite of what is in a real debate, where you respect the person but disagree with the argument. So this is what we have to address in Europe. This is what is core. This is our focus. It is to address what has been happening over the last 20 years. And in everything we do, in every piece of policy that we propose, we put people first. You know, I'm not a technician, and yet I'm in charge of a Europe fit for digital age. Because the point is not that it's a technical thing. The point is that it's a human thing. It's about insisting on being human. We pursue a goal to make sure that no matter how fast technology evolves, they always serve people. And the approach is an action plan designed to give back to us as people, in this case, often we call ourselves users, part of the control that we lost when we approached and appreciated what the platforms brought us. For decades, such gatekeepers, those whose algorithms decides what reality we see, they were almost free to do as they wished. A few years ago, though, the European Union spearheaded a global effort to reverse the trend, with an ambition to restore fairness, to protect people. We created a global standard in protecting privacy, in protecting personal data, the data that shows who you are, what you want, what you're looking for. But more than anything else, we have the ambition to protect the most powerful, yet fragile common good. And that is our liberal democracy. After all, if Lincoln's famous definition of democracy is right, there can be no democratic digitization without technologies working by the people and for the people. That is the place of technology. We think that there are two ways to get there. First, that we empower us as people by ensuring the rights and the knowledge that we need to stay in control of our digital interactions. And second, that we make the laws necessary for those who provide us with digital services, of course, depending on their role they play in our society and economy, but also depending on the risks that they pose to us and our democracy. And this twofold approach, for us as individuals, rights, knowledge to be in control, and for those who provide the services, the framework that they are under democratic control, that is what frames our initiatives. And we do not start from scratch. These are the good news. Since 2016, our citizens' right, the General Data Protection Regulation, sets the course for democracy actually to be able to catch up. It enacted the fundamental principle that we as citizens, we have rights online just as well as we have rights offline. And the two worlds should not be separate. the right to be forgotten, to own and control our data. Well, to choose if we want to be tracked or if we want to stay free of tracking. I'm the first to admit that today the use of these privacy rights still have flaws. We still have way to go for that is perfect and that works well for all businesses of all sizes. But still, I hate to admit it, but I also click agree without having read 80 pages of terms and conditions. I feel good about myself when I'm asking it to send it to my email, but that doesn't make me read it either. And that's the problem with each and every one of us when we're there faced with something that seems to be designed for us not to read it, that we click agree anyway. And then it's difficult to exercise your rights. But it is a very basic idea that this law has set in stone, that every one of us has the right to privacy. A right just to close the doors, draw the curtains, as we would if we've had a bad day at work or university and just want to be left alone. Those rights, they are also our rights when we are online. Close the door, draw the curtains. I just want to be myself, for no one to watch what I'm doing. But that was then, and this is now. We need to go further. Earlier this year in March, the European Commission proposed a set of European digital principles. They include, for instance, a universal right to high-quality connectivity, a right to have the education, to get the skills needed to control technologies, and to have access to fair online services that will not discriminate you. More generally, these principles, they are set out there for debate, for discussion, in order to engrave in our minds that just as well as we have fundamental rights in the Charter for our offline world, we also need to have fundamental rights for our online world. In addition to fundamental rights, democracy relies on another central, yet sometimes maybe not so visible component, which is knowledge. I think it's a popular saying that authoritarian regimes, they thrive on fear and ignorance. This is what they are made of. This is why people can be controlled. The less we know about how things work, well, the more likely we are to believe what we are told. And probably also the more likely we are just to let it go, not to be bothered, not to try to get in control of things. And this is why one of our main priorities is to enable us to get the knowledge about how internet services works. What is it that we have in front of us? And this is one of the objectives of this legislation that we have proposed, the Digital Services Act. The point of that piece of proposed legislation is to say, well, how should these digital platforms, how should they process, how should they deal with the content that they serve us? Well, basically what we're trying to do is to introduce the rules of the internet. It's a bit like the rules of the road. We take it for granted that we have those rules, of course, otherwise accidents would happen. And this is only now we get to that for the internet, for the digital services out there, to introduce the rules of the road. And probably one of the core things here is to say, well, what are our expectations? What are you allowed to do? What are your responsibilities here? For the first time, we try to set in stone that digital platforms, they have a responsibility to create a transparent, free, yet safe digital environment. Core to this is the obligation for platforms to make it transparent. Why do I see what I see? How do algorithms actually operate? We don't have an interest in the algorithm in itself, but we have a keen interest as to what it is that is presented to us and why. Because, as said, there is a selection taking place, a perfectly carved world for you or for you that no one else might share. And this will also tell us why are we targeted by certain ads. That will give us a much better idea as to who wants to influence us and why do they want to do it. And that, of course, is completely innocent if someone wants to sell you a dress, but maybe not so much if they want to have you vote for a certain party. And having knowledge, well, we think that everyone will be much better equipped to decide for ourselves whether we believe what we see or if we don't. But it's not quite enough, because of course in these things also there is an economic component. There's a market out there. Money is being made. We cannot just address the role of platforms in addressing their behavior. We also need to address how do they behave in the marketplace where money is made. And we're not talking about small money. We're talking about a lot of money. And the thing is, a strong democracy also have an open, vivid, fair marketplace. We don't go to vote every day. We may not have an interesting debate about the future of Europe or city development in Berlin every day, but we go to the market every day. And if we are treated fairly by the market, that the market is serving us as consumers, I think that adds a bit on the dignity and the integrity of each and every one of us as a citizen. And because of that, it also enhances our democracy. Because we make choices. And democracy is fundamentally about making choices. What do you want? How do you compromise? What do you do? And protecting the marketplace to make it fair, contestable, open, is to protect choice. So we proposed what is then called the Digital Markets Act. And the basics are simple. With success comes size, with size comes power, and with power you have responsibility. Many digital platforms, they have for a long time ago outgrown their role as simple intermediaries. Those who were just between me who want to sell a used bike or the books from last year and those who want to sell it. The role is so much more active. It's a different creature these days. And they have created monopolies for their services, which means that they act as gatekeepers for all the many, many, many millions of smaller businesses who rely on them to be able to get to the customers, to show what they have invented, to show what they have to sell. Small sellers who have no choice, but actually to rely on the gatekeepers to reach their platforms, to reach their customers. And that position, to become a gatekeeper, is fueled by a fundamental thing, which is access to data. If you have access to data, then basically you can decide. And running a digital platform the size of a gatekeeper, well, that allows you almost perfect knowledge of the transactions of everyone using your platform. Just imagine what it takes. Just imagine if the president should know what every student was doing all the time with whom, just at the campus. But the point of the platforms is that here you have the ability to know what everyone is doing all the time, where they're doing it, with whom. And that allows, of course, them to set the rules of the game, because you have this knowledge. They can decide on what terms their services can be used and who can or who cannot connect with customers. And this is why we proposed the Digital Markets Act. The point is to restore fairness an open market. And it sets a clear obligation for platforms to keep the gates open, to keep the gates to the online marketplace open, and of course prohibits unfair behavior. To create such a place, online and internet, that we can trust, where we feel safe and at home, well, there is another aspect, and that is to know whether we are dealing with each other or whether we're dealing with a bot. Just a nice nugget of information. Is this service assistant a real human being, or is it just a machine? Is this someone who is really there, or is it just someone pretending? And this is why we also want to enable us to digitally identify ourselves. Not that anyone would have to do it, but to give everyone to be out there literally with their face. That I want to show you who I am, so that you can trust that when I participate in this dialogue, you know who I am. Platforms are actually doing a lot. We've had a code of conduct for quite some years. It has taken some time, but now, at long last, detecting and finding the fake accounts of the bots is picking up. Last but not least, as said when I started, we're not alone. Because the point of the giant platforms is that they're everywhere. And it's not just in Europe that we have set out to fight for our democracy with laws in our hands. It is a thing that is spreading, because citizens and businesses all over the world, they share the same concerns that we have. And when there is a shared concern, there's also a possibility of shared action, or at least an alignment of the way we think. Some argue that this is Europe being envious of big US companies. But actually it's quite the opposite. It's about the need to loosen the grip, this grip that a few large companies have gained over our societies, to allow for more platforms, for more diversity, for more openness. And with our legislation to restore democratic control, it turns out we share an ambition with our friends in the US. If you follow the debate, you've seen that quite a long time ago. There was a recognition that this is a challenge and that we share it. And regulatory ideas have been discussed also over there for quite a while. However, not legislation have been tabled yet, which means, of course, that we still have an advantage as a first mover in Europe to do what we can to set a global standard for how things should be if democracy should be free and open. But still, I think we are together in this endeavor. That with the United States, we have a privileged partner in sharing a common ambition about the rules of the road for the digital economy, because we're big and we're all democracies. A few months ago, when President Biden was in Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, and him, they decided to launch the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. And that is to turn this idea of alignment into something practical. This means that we will be working together on issues such as cybersecurity, data, technologies, the role of online platforms, how to mitigate the risk of some use cases of AI. And already the first results have emerged on our meeting in Pittsburgh just a few weeks ago. And there are many more democracies all over this world that we can work with. And I think it's more necessary than ever that we find democracies, that we find like-minded, that we see the open nature of internet being challenged by autocratic models of digitization. There are another way out there, which is not the European way, where technology is being used as a means of surveillance, of control, of extraction of data, where citizens just are the data sources for the advancement of the state. And we can show how the good use of technology can benefit our democracies instead of threatening them. Ladies and gentlemen, our world is changing with an extraordinary speed. We still have economic and social effects of COVID that needs to be addressed. The climate crisis needs immediate action. The digital transformation of our societies need guidance, clear rules. It's not as acceptable that a few private companies have taken control. And sometimes, of course, it makes you dizzy to look at the crisis that we have to address. And if Europe wants to succeed in such an ever-changing world with a still faster pace, well, we need to do it together, to stand up for who we are. Today, the digital space gives us an unprecedented chance to preserve, to live our democratic debates, to solve a big part of the climate crisis, to get where we want to go in making inclusive societies. Rarely in history have so many people had a potential access not only to information, but also to engage with one another. But only if we fix it will we get a real exchange of information, of opinion. So this open and fair dialogue, fueled by our wish to have it, well, that can happen if we know that the other one is a human being. If we use our voices to clearly claim that in our democracy, that it is for us as human beings. It's not for the largest platforms to decide the rules of the games. It is indeed for those that we have elected to set our laws. It is 100% legitimate to take control and to say that this is how it should be played, in order for everyone to be invited for a digital world that may be fast, that may sometimes be hurtful, but that will be a place where democracy can develop, and not a place where democracy is privatized and dismantled. And in that, of course, I count on you. Because we can do all we want systematically. We can propose all the laws we want. Our legislature can pass them, but only if we want democracy every day it will happen. Because it doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by itself. It only happens if we as humans insist that we will live in democratic societies. Thank you very much.